we allow and encourage climate science to be done by climate scientists, but we let anybody be an energy expert. And we all know we are, except most of us don't know where gasoline comes from, how our electricity is really made. But we think we do. And that's the great dilemma, because we vote. Okay. And that's the dilemma of energy. But we actually need to listen to our energy scientists when it comes to solutions for climate change. And my talk today is called The Political Paradox of Sustainable Energy, because the solutions for climate change are not what those who are most passionate about climate want. It's not what their voter base wants. It won't solve climate change, if indeed it's CO2 and methane emissions. So how do you address these things in an energy sensible way? And it's solvable. The nice part about it's pretty simple. It's not easy, but it's fairly simple. Okay, and I think that's where the conversations that allow us to gather in a radical middle and have conversations around some facts and data, but also the stories that of our lives they are so powerful. And those powerful stories, I think we all engage, and that's what I mean, we want the same thing. So now how do we go about doing it? And I'll show an example of Germany on a slide today with good intentions. I mean, I just simply have, at 60 years old, I've stopped judging intentions. I just like to look at outcomes. What happened? Did it work? Is it working? Should we readjust? Should we allow our politicians to change their minds? Or are we going to accuse them of being flip-floppers? I reserve my right as a scientist to change my mind with more data and more facts, more information. Everybody should have that freedom to do that without being accused of something. Otherwise, we will not be able to grow and evolve. We just put in fence posts and we can't get out of them. Okay, and this is what frustrates, I think, many of us in this field, this global field, is the conversations that become entrenched because of the scenario in which they're set. And that's why I think that true thought leaders can help this happen in a way that isn't quite so parochial.
I think you're exactly right in terms of, one, it's more important to focus on results. What's actually working? That's an important part of the deliberative process that does often get lost in Washington, D.C. because people are talking about these issues where they have an inch-depth knowledge, and they end up going into these entrenched and defined policy spaces that are totally unhelpful to trying to figure out what does our energy future actually look like. So in talking about that, renewables are a part of the energy mix today. They'll continue to be a part of it in the future. I don't believe that it'll be 100%. There's a lot of physical limitations. I guess it's a two-part question. One is, what are some of those physical limitations that people need to be honest about, know about and be honest about? And then number two, what is the realistic future for renewable energy the next 10, 20, by 2100 timeframes? Sorry,
Well,
Dr. T.
I'll start with a couple of statements. And if you're engaged by these or pissed off by them, join us at lunch and show a little data. But first of all, the sun and the wind are renewable, but the panels and the turbines and the batteries to collect them aren't renewable. There's nothing renewable about them. They require mining. If you don't grow it, you mine it. Everything we make to collect the sun and the wind and store it is mined. And they wear out, so we mine them again. So as we go to scale with the sun and the wind, we're going to have a very different environmental challenge. It's the land, it's nature. It's the mining, the manufacturing, and the disposal as they wear out. We're seeing it in Wyoming today. They're burying 900 turbine blades from 300 turbines, cutting them into thirds. And the largest landfill in Wyoming, it's fiberglass. It's not chemically toxic anyway, but it's a big landfill. In Texas, we have 13,000 turbines. Batteries, electric vehicles. I was surprised by the statement as well, but I'll show data today. But let's electrify half the world's vehicle fleet, 600 to 650 million vehicles out of 1.3 billion. How many batteries are in a car? How many are in a Tesla S? Not the battery pack. How many batteries? About the size of your cell phone. 7,200 in a Tesla S in the floor bed. Let's do 5,000 batteries times 600 million vehicles is 3 trillion batteries. Count to 1,001, 1,002, 1,003 to 3 trillion. It takes 96,000 years to count to 3 trillion. Where are they going to come from? Where are they going to go? In landfill. It's just a different challenge. Energy at scale, that's why density matters. Okay, so renewable energy has a place. Solar and wind, I should say, have a place, and other forms. But they have their own challenge at scale. And so density matters. The electric vehicle was here first, and then along came gasoline because it was better. It was more dense. There are other options to that. The fuel cell, LNG, hydrogen, LNG electric vehicles, they all have a place and a mix in that transportation scene. The same with power generation. We talked about nuclear a minute ago, and there are ways down there, very dense forms of energy. So these matter. The denser, the less impact. Okay, and there are some, you don't have to take my word for it, but there are some environmentalists out there who are pretty sharp. Michael Schellenberger, who's worked in various administrations, has some good TED Talks on this in nuclear. Stuart Brand, the original environmentalist, remember the Whole Earth Catalog? He and I shared a stage in the Northeast not many years ago. They thought there'd be fireworks, the geologist from Texas and the environmentalist from San Francisco Bay. We converged on the same solutions, and it was very disappointing to the audience of 300, but he's quite passionate about dense energy and dense foods and dense everything because it's better for the environment. So here's the trick on this is energy underpins the environment, underpins the economy, energy underpins the economy. The data are very clear on this. You have to have a healthy economy to be able to invest in the environment at scale. I've been in 65 countries. The worst environments in the world are where it is poor. They simply can't afford to clean it up. The best are where we are rich. We have the regulations. We enforce them for air and land and water. Yes, we can overregulate, but regulations help. So that little waltz, that little energy, economy, environment waltz is everything. We've got to lift the world up in order for poverty, for inequality, but also to clean up the environment. It's not that complicated. It's just hard to get done.
You're exactly right. I think that one of the hardest things to achieve in that context is what is the appropriate level of balance. It's certainly something that we struggled every day when I was working on regulations at EPA, where the mission is something we can all agree to, but how do you do it in a way to where it doesn't become an inadvertent barrier to that economic growth that is absolutely vital to a clean environment. Dr. Pizer, do you want to add a little bit on the renewable energy question and what does it look like going into the future?
Well, it has the question has two aspects. One is the technological limitation, and the other is the economic impact. Never mind the because these renewables have a footprint often 1,000 times bigger than a simple power plant. So I'm not talking about the thousands of birds and bats and so on that these kill. I want to focus on the technology and on the
retire that one.
So on the technology, in the absence of storage, in the absence of batteries that can store renewable energy cannot power any country 100%. And it's very simple to explain. Renewable energy in particular, I mean, with the exception of hydro, of course, but when we talk about wind and solar, we can only generate power if there's wind, if there's sun. So, for instance, in Germany, which is perhaps one of the most advanced countries in terms of renewable development, on a hot, windy day, almost half of the electricity can now be generated by renewable energy. But in a dark, windless winter month, it could be a week or 2 weeks without much electricity. So what do you do then if you don't have electricity and you have to power, industrial nation? So they have, of course, conventional power plants. So they have, gas and coal and still some nuclear, not much, but they have still. So they basically use the conventional power plants. But let's say they have decommissioned all of them, because they want to phase out nuclear, they want to phase out coal, and they want to phase out gas. So you have a country like Germany just powered by wind and solar. What happens in those 2 weeks where there is no wind and no sun in the winter happens? Well, it's easy. You import the electricity from your neighbors. The problem is, of course, by 2050 is all the neighbors also only have wind and solar. And there is nothing to import because they are struggling to get electricity. So this whole idea of renewables powering an industrial nation is just technologically impossible in the absence of storage. And whether there will be ever a technological solution to batteries big enough to store enough energy to power 2 weeks of Germany remains to be seen. So technological, that's the limit. Economically, we have the another problem in that no one is building conventional power plants anymore in Europe, for the simple reason that they are no longer profitable because they are no longer running 24/7. They are basically used for backup for the periods when you need conventional electricity generation.
Can you talk about on that, the backup? How does that impact emissions when you run these plants in an inefficient manner and they're used as backup?
Well, that is part of the problem. These power plants, particularly gas-fired power plants, are actually emitting more CO2 under more renewable scenarios than if you run them 24/7. So there are economists pointing out that if you have these gas-fired power plants mainly for backup for renewables, you will actually end up with an increase of CO2 emissions from these power plants because they are running inefficiently. But the main point here is that they are no longer running economically. So you have to first subsidize the renewables. Then you have to subsidize the conventional power plants because they're no longer economic. Then the industry comes and says, look, the energy price is so high, we can't actually stay competitive in Germany. So you have to pay us a subsidy too. So basically where you end up is that everything is subsidized. So the renewables are subsidized, the conventional power plants are subsidized, and then the industry comes and says we can't actually compete with China and the rest of the world. We need subsidies too. That's the reality in Europe.
So I'll let Dr. Tinker answer this, and then we're going to switch to Q&A from the audience. So while he's answering, think about your questions you want to ask. I'm going to pass this to you, and then I'll just stand up at the podium and solve this mic issue.
Just a quick add-on to that. The challenge is we hear the cost of renewables have come down, and they're at parity with, and certainly the panel cost and the turbine cost have come down dramatically. Not much headroom, in fact, to go any lower. Then we have something called LCOE, or the levelized cost of energy, or levelized cost of electricity, and that incorporates more things. But when you read the word levelized, you think it's levelizing across the board, but it still doesn't include the cost of transmission and backup. Mm-hmm. And that's why when you go into geopolitical regions and look at the price of electricity at the end to the consumer, it's higher with intermittency, brilliantly described there. Those are the reasons why the whole cost of electricity in Germany is 28 to 30 cents a kilowatt hour, somewhere in that range, 3 to 4 times here. And we have 2x discrepancy in different states in the United States. If it were causing the effect of lowering CO2 emissions, that would be interesting because you might be willing to invest in that. But ironically, in Germany, what's happened, and I'll show the data at launch, is when we took with the scare of fracking natural gas down, it was increasing, flattened it, and nuclear from Fukushima Daiichi flattened. Coal which was declining, started to level again, and even imports and physical coal, wind went up more steeply. So the CO2 decline that was happening actually flattened in Germany while the price went up. You know, brilliant. And so this is intentions and outcomes, and same kind of thing with zero emissions. You know, when you say we're going to be a zero emissions state, really? So no clothes, no food, no home, no cell phone, no car, nothing? Where does your stuff come from? It comes from over there. What's happening over there? How many atmospheres are there? There's one. So if the stuff that I'm using is made over there and we're worried about climate change, it's still going into the atmosphere. Just one atmosphere. It's not a local river. It's not a local stream. So this matters. This zero emissions claim sounds so good, but it's really disingenuous. It's misleading to the public who hear it and say, how many would like to be zero emissions? I would. How many would like to increase the emissions into the global atmosphere if we are zero emissions? No, maybe not. So let's ask the question correctly, because that's what's happening. Okay, that's what's happening. For the exact reasons described, is you can't export zero emissions far enough, maybe extraterrestrially, but on this planet. You can't export it far enough. At some point, somebody's making something, and it's with dense energy. So we have to clean that up. Fossil fuels aren't clean. They are dirty. Whatever that means, and I'll talk about what it means. Guess what? So are solar and wind. It's just a different kind of dirty at scale. They all have impacts on the environment. So what's the right mix, and how do we clean them up? How do we make it better for the things we all want? Cleaner air, cleaner water, better soils, climate change. That's the conversation that needs to go on in a really honest way, an open way, with good stories. Stories that catch us, that matter. And they're out there.
Absolutely. So I'll open it up if there's any questions from the audience. Jason, we'll start with you. Yeah, there's a mic right behind you.
You want to use this one? All right, we just repeat it. Challenge with batteries, right?
Okay, Jason Hayes from the Mackinac Center. You started to talk about environmental impacts associated with using renewable energy and that sort of thing. One of the other, it's not just emissions related, it's other issues. So the keys that I always talk about, Baotou, China, the Democratic Republic of Congo, where do we get our lithium? Where do we get our cobalt and our rare earth minerals? So either one of you, if you want to talk about that, there's more to it than just emissions. We're also exporting a lot of other pollution.
Yeah, again. Right, so emissions, if your only objective function is atmospheric emissions, you're going to impact other things. Just the reality. When you create low-density things that capture low-density energy, it takes a lot of stuff. Not complicated stuff, but a lot of stuff. And that's mining. So batteries themselves, lithium, cobalt, you mentioned, and other cations and anions that are going to be, other metals that are going to be needed to make batteries. Now, John Goodenough at UT just won the Nobel Prize for lithium-ion batteries. A brilliant guy. He's just started the second half of his career. He's 97. So, oldest Nobel laureate ever. But he's working on solid-state batteries now, which is interesting. You know, a whole different technological change. The electric car isn't different from the internal combustion engine car. They're both cars. They just have a different fuel. So the analogy between the horse and the car, and then the internal combustion and the internal, and that's not an analogy. They're both cars. The car and the horse is different technology. So it's really important as we start to think about technological change and impacts. Mining, manufacturing, the cloud, data centers consume 3% of the world's electricity now, and growing steeply. Every time you fire up a video on your phone, CO2 emissions. More CO2 out of videos now than the global trains times 1.5, just out of video streaming. Okay. Bitcoin consumes more electricity than Austria, the whole country. Have you ever spent a Bitcoin? What is it? And so the things we're doing have impacts. They have impacts atmospherically, local air emissions. They have impacts on the land through mining, manufacturing, and then disposal. Where's all the stuff go? It matters. We have a lot of stuff in the oil and gas business and coal mining too. It's got tons of stuff. It makes a lot of energy. So we can't pretend like there's a clean and dirty, a good and bad. That's a false equation. It sounds good, but it teaches your kids information that isn't real. We have to look at the reality of these things and then make good decisions based on those realities.
Dr. Pizer, you want to add anything to that or move on to the next question? Okay. Do we have another question from the audience?
Can you talk a little bit about, are we learning from these examples like Germany? Because there's enough data now that you can see what appears from the outside looking in, a failed experiment. And California is another one that you could pick on, or you can see these things failing, but you don't hear anybody talk about those. Is that entering into the debate or the discussion at all?
Well, I hope that U.S. policy and lawmakers will actually look at countries that have gone down that path faster and much deeper than most of the U.S. Because there are lessons to be learned. Even the countries themselves are beginning to realize the limitations and the unintended consequences of their policies. The biggest impact, apart from the huge rise in energy prices and the economic effect in terms of just today, 3,000 steel workers have been sacked, basically because steel is no longer possible to produce competitively in Europe, as the energy price is so much higher than the rest of the world. Again, they get some kind of compensation, but it's not enough. It's not good enough. I mentioned the car industry, never mind the energy industry. Heavy industry, and I can only confirm what was said earlier on, if you include the CO2 emissions that are imported, so basically Europe has shifted a lot of production to China and Vietnam and so on, because they're good guys, and then import the products to Europe. If you include the CO2 emissions of these products that are now imported, produced somewhere else, but imported, there is not much reduction in CO2 emissions in Europe going on. But because it's not produced in Europe, they think they are doing the right thing. But of course, CO2 doesn't matter where it's emitted. It goes in the atmosphere. It's totally irrelevant where you produce it. So that is one of the key problems. And of course, the US could make the same mistake. I mean, you're fortunate with your shale revolution to have this gold mine that produces this cheap energy. And if you were ever to forgive and ban this stuff, like Europe is banning fracking, although we have huge shale basins as well. But the political class has decided to ban it and to get the gas from lovely China, Russia, right? So if you were to go down that route that Europe has done, then you shouldn't be surprised if your industry will become less competitive and other countries will simply take advantage of that. The Chinese are burning more coal than the rest of the world together. And their latest decision, which was reported last week, at national level is to downgrade renewable energy and to go full throttle to coal. So they are building more coal-fired power plants. After all, they're sitting on the coal. Why import expensive energy if you're sitting on cheap energy? They are not asked to do anything according to the Paris Agreement, as we know. And so they are just doing what is best for China. Now, of course, the climate campaigners are saying, don't look at what's best for Europe or what's best for the US. You have to think about, Armageddon. And there is simply nothing more important than preventing Armageddon, even if you have to sacrifice your economy. And that is the stark choice that voters have, both in Europe and the US, to decide whether they want to keep their economy going or whether they want to be green virtue signalers without really making much of a difference, as I mentioned before.
There's an interesting transition that happens. I'll just tell 3 quick stories. As we build our economies on coal-powered electricity, which we've all done. We did it, Germany did it, China's doing it. Vietnam's going to do it. They've just announced 50 new coal power plants, 400 megawatts in the next 20 years as they compete with China to make our stuff. Filmed there, you'll see it and switch on. They can't do renewables really. They've built all the dams they can. It's jungle. It's a long, narrow country, and so you can't get wind there, and you can't get the sun there. A little bit, but not to the scales needed. So here comes Vietnam. That's the reality. How do you capture and store the CO2? That has to happen in Vietnam. 100 million people. Come back to Gunchukwa in Colombia. The Arhuaco village, we brought first solar there, 3.5 kilowatt panel, half what you'd put on your house, to power up 7 mud huts with thatch roofs. They've lived that way for 600 years. A light bulb in each of the huts, 3 ceiling fans in the community center, 1 refrigerator freezer. A battery stack that my wife and I bought for 15 grand, lead acid. Most modern there are to back up that system so they can run their lights at night when the sun's not out. Now, that'll do that. There are a billion people that live that way. There's nothing, they don't have roads, they don't have wires, they don't have pipelines. That's the only way to get electricity there to get started. Fast forward or come across the world to Ethiopia, 100 million people, one of the most severely impoverished countries in the world, decided on their Blue Nile, which flows north, merged with the White Nile to the Nile to Cairo, Egypt, who by colonial law owns the Nile. Ethiopia said, maybe not. Maybe we own our own Nile, and they've built one of the largest dams in the world. It's 70% complete, called the GERD, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, with their own money. A lot of corruption, but their own money. And that is a 6.4 gigawatt dam, 16,400 megawatt turbines. That's 6 nuclear reactors. You have to put a capacity factor on there. 6 nuclear reactors. They're wind-driven. 6 nuclear reactors. It would be 10 coal power plants, plus or minus. 10,000 wind turbines. 2 megawatt onshore with a capacity factor of about 30-35%. 10,000 turbines, 1 dam. They both have environmental impacts, but it's very efficient once it's full. There's a lot of impact on the environment upstream and down. It'll power half the country, 50 million people, and they can sell electricity to their neighbors. It's disrupted the balance of power in North Africa. The whole conversation is now changing. Egypt threatened to bomb it, and now they're at the table talking. But these are the solutions to global energy poverty. Scalable ones and distributed renewable ones, they both matter. They both are going to have an impact. The point is, it takes a lot of energy to lift up the world, and it's there. How do we do it in a way that we acknowledge matters but keep it clean? That's the conversation. This whole conversation that we have to end certain kind of fuels and go to another one is really quite silly. That'd be like saying with food, because it uses water, fertilizers, run off into streams, we're just going to end food. No, we're going to probably clean it up and continue to make sure agricultural practices don't damage the environment. We're not going to end oil and gas and coal. It's just a different, food is measured in calories. It's just a different unit of energy. Let's clean them up. Let's add those that can supplement and be good and clean them up too along the way. But let's have the conversation about how to make the environmental impacts of all forms of energy on all forms of the environment better while powering the world.
Okay, well, yeah, thank you. Join me in thanking them for a really great panel.
Where do you want us?
I'll sit on this one. You guys can take the All right. Well, my name is Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and this is going to be the fun panel. So you know how at like a wedding you have that one table that's had a little too much wine, a little bit of rambunctious, and they're the fun table? Well, that's what we're going to be today. We're going to be the fun panel. And if you didn't know anything at all about Dr. Rossiter, you would know that this would be the fun panel just by that choice of shirt alone. So we're also going to be the fun panel because we're the only thing standing between you and lunch. So we're going to keep it engaging. We're going to keep it light and have a good discussion here. So we've all heard today the importance. Excuse me, I'm half millennial, so I'm going to use my phone for notes. So we've all heard the critical importance of energy today, about how you can't even, I mean, you saw the video earlier, you can't even get out of bed in the morning hardly and make your avocado toast without constantly using energy, much less take your kids to school, go to work, and be productive. And so that's why an organization like TPPF is really at the center of promoting reliable and affordable energy, because it is so important to all of the other things that we want to do, whether we talk about education or healthcare, or even property taxes. So that's why we have an entire campaign trying to promote reliable and affordable energy, and it's why it's one of the major things that we work on. And really, energy is at the front lines in the battle for affordable and is at the front lines of making sure that we have a prosperous and free country. So that's why we're here talking about this. And today with our two panelists, we're going to talk a little bit about the war that we're in right now. The battle lines essentially is really an information war. It's a communication war. 95% of our campaign really focuses on how to talk about these issues, how to convince other people of these issues, how to really understand your audiences and what they know and what they don't know. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the strategy and tactics that we employ, and even look a little introspective and see what we're doing wrong and what we're doing right in terms of being able to tell these stories and communicate effectively. So that brings me to our panelists today. Climate statistician Dr. Caleb Rossiter is the executive director of the CO2 Coalition of 50 climate scientists and energy economists. Dr. Rossiter has worked in Washington's foreign policy and academic areas since 1981. He was the deputy director of the bipartisan Congressional Arms Control and Foreign Policy Caucus, and then counselor to the Democratic chair of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee. Dr. Rossiter earned his PhD in policy analysis from Cornell University and his master's in mathematics from American University, where he was a professor.
He was also a statics professor in South Africa at the University of the Western Cape. And of course, we all met Mary Spaeth this morning and her fantastic presentation, sort of at the macro level of communications. And now we're going to get into the micro level, talking specifically about how to communicate on this issue. As you heard earlier, Mary Spaeth is the founder and president of Spaeth Communications. Mary is acknowledged as one of the most influential communication counselors in the world. Mary has coached thousands of executives who want to become more effective communicators, improve their presentation skills, and ultimately expand their leadership capabilities. She's a cum laude graduate of Smith College and a graduate of Columbia Business School. She's an instructor at the Business Leadership Center of SMU's Cox School of Business, where she teaches communication as a strategic business tool, influencing the power of storytelling, which I want to talk a little bit about today. Humor as a leadership tool. She speaks on these topics and others to companies and associations in virtually every industry. So please help me welcome Mary Spaeth and Dr. Caleb Rossiter. So my first topic of discussion, just want to get right into it. You know, as part of the conservative movement, and of course a lot of think tankers here and research people, you know, we love our stats. We love our facts. And the fact is, much of our stats and our facts effectively contradict a lot of the falsehoods and misstatements from the other side. So Mary, if we can't use our facts and our stats, can you tell us a little bit how to communicate more effectively on the battlefield of the energy issue?
This is going to be a shocker. Okay, wait for it. You tell a story, right? That's why I went through the enlistment technique, because you can't just grab somebody by the lapels. One of the underlying things that I want to get to is that stats imply that we're going to educate you. Okay, and if you sit somebody down and say, "I'm going to educate you," what's their response? I'm out of here. If you ask them a question, though, you say, "Can I tell you a story?" They're generally going to say, "Yes." Can I try one? Sure. Okay. Got props. Okay. Who here has heard of Georgetown? Texas. A couple people. Okay. Georgetown. Yeah. Great. Okay. So this is a fable, which is a variety of story. In 2012, Georgetown, and they got national attention. They announced that they were going to be 100% powered by wind and solar. What do you think? Sound good? And so they negotiated, and they went 100% powered by wind and solar in 2012. And guess what? They're bankrupt.
End of story.
Because here's the thing, though. The city manager, poor David Morgan, I really feel for this guy. His plaint is, but all the projections showed increase in energy costs and a shortage in supply. Boo-hoo. And so they bet big on this. And of course, what happened? Okay, energy costs went, as we've just learned, down, right? And the shortage in supply didn't happen. Instead, supplies went up. So the real question is, and I think one of our guests mentioned this, is really the question is, who do you trust to forecast the future? Is it the government? You want to be like Georgetown? Or is it the citizen? Okay. Which would you put your trust in? Okay. It's up to you. Okay. But we've got a wonderful little thing, and I feel so sorry for this guy because his projection back in 2012 didn't turn out that way. Okay. But then when you say to people, how many other, can I keep going on this?
Sure.
Okay. Actually, I got another one coming up too, so I'll turn it over to him, then I'll come back for projection number 2.
So, Dr. Rossiter, one of the interesting things, one of the differences between our two panelists here is Mary is such a good communicator in terms of the public and the general audience. But Dr. Rossiter, you communicate mostly with lawmakers and policymakers. What is the biggest difference in terms of trying to get a message across to a policymaker or a lawmaker to try to get them to do the right thing in terms of how they vote and the policies they support?
Thanks very much. Everything working here, Brian?
Solar power.
Well, I should just say in advance that as Kathleen Hartnett White found out when she first invited me to come speak at a Crossroads conference about 5 years ago, I'm not part of the conservative movement that you introduced us as. I come at this from a very different perspective. Having worked for the Democrats in the House and in the Senate, and with Republicans as well in a bipartisan caucus, I saw a lot of real master communicators, like you saw this morning when the Congressman spoke here, who, as appropriate to your instruction, answer the question that they wish to answer and do extremely well. But I think our exchange this morning, when I tried to push the Congressman on how he handles fears of the climate catastrophe, the Armageddon, which is driving all of this policy and justifies all this policy. He started out with saying he drives a hybrid. He's trying to disarm people because he doesn't want to upset anybody. And I've run for Congress, and I can tell you your main goal is not to upset anybody. You're nodding. By the end, he told the greatest story you've ever heard about the Secretary of Energy predicting Texas would be a dust bowl in 10 years, and this guy's going fishing. I wish he'd started with that. That sort of shows the problem we face in communicating with the Congress. The members have to get reelected. Before you can save the world, you have to save your seat. And their job is not to be the primary educators on basic science, basic economics. The world can only stand so many Phil Grahams. Phil was a great senator, first congressman and senator when I knew him back in the 1980s, but nobody wants to be lectured all the time and told that they're wrong. Not many members like to do that. So we have to provide explanations of the science and the economics that you've heard here today in a way that can be used in a friendly fashion as members try to calm the fears of their constituents. I think that's really the primary job that we have. Genesis Torres is here today from our staff, who's a scientist who works for us on the Hill all the time, trying to bring those sorts of messages. But it doesn't work on the Hill in a confrontational way. It doesn't work at a town meeting in a confrontational way. I very much like what we were told by Dr. Tinker earlier about how to say we all want the same thing. We want a good environment. We want health. We want wealth. We want long life expectancy. We want to protect this planet, and how we get there. I'm looking forward to us finding messages like that rather than the sort of very sterile confrontations I've observed this last year in Congress.
So how do we improve that, Mary? How do we get there, as Dr. Rossiter is talking about? Do we need to look at what our general messaging is right now and just find a different way of saying it, or is the message wrong itself?
Well, I think I see different levels of messages. The first one, and you all have alluded to it, is the scare message. The world's going to end in 10 years. My heart just broke for that poor girl who came over, Greta, right? She's 16, right? Oh, how sad. I just wanted to give her a car. Okay. But first of all, I think we have to diffuse the fear message in a way that doesn't say, you're wrong. Okay. And I've been collecting projections and props. I don't know how many of you remember the 1968 book, The Population Bomb. Yeah, I would encourage everybody to get a copy of it in paperback on Amazon, carry it around with you, or just cut the cover off. 1968. In the 1970s and 80s, hundreds of millions of people are going to starve to death. While you have read these words, 4 people will have died from starvation, most of them children. Did this happen? I mean, you all have been alive that day. You remember that. Did this happen? Okay, and the question is why? And it's because of progress. So you can't just say you're wrong about this, because the people projecting doom and gloom are looking 12 years into the future. You have to try and, in a semi-humorous way, cast some doubt on it. And the second part of the message, and I think, believe me, I'm going to talk to Dr. Burgess about this. If you remember my old boss, Ronald Reagan, and what I tell my clients constantly, we have to project confidence. And I think because many of you are scientists and you want to be even-headed and balanced, what you end up doing is not projecting confidence, but projecting a sense of questioning. rather than saying, because this is, and I'm sure you've heard other people say this, and I apologize for the sensationalism of this, but at one end of the environmentalists, it's really become a religion. I mean, if you don't believe that, you are evil and sinning. But the only hope for that, instead of picking it apart, I have my own no, it's supposed to work. Okay, is to say, I have confidence in faith. In part because I'm an American and I believe in innovation. But that framework has got to be articulated rather than just picking out the pieces and in the opposition's point of view, nitpicking. So it's not a statistical question in the world that I live in. It's a framing question about faith in progress and innovation and entrepreneurship with things to back it up.
So I want to stick with this point that you made just a minute ago, just really briefly, and we'll get back to Dr. Rossiter, but this idea of not starting with "you're wrong." There was a Harvard business study that demonstrated that even when presented with facts and evidence that contradicted someone's position or perspective on an issue, it actually hardened their position. That even though the facts clearly said that they were wrong, it actually hardened their position on things. So that's that confirmation bias that we see all the time. So if we don't start with "you're wrong," if someone says, the world's going to end in 10 years and then it doesn't happen, or the sea levels are rising, but they've been rising the same level for 200 years, you can show them all this evidence and they still don't change their mind. What is the approach? What is a framework that we can start with that will start to ease that tension and get people to open their minds a little bit more about the facts?
Again, you have to start by projecting confidence and faith and plant a seed. I mean, these are conversations that don't come to fruition in one conversation. You have to, and then, as you could tell, I hope from even my brief presentation, you want to ask questions. Because when you frame questions that simply ask, like, are you willing to think about this? Okay. Almost everybody's going to say what? Yes. Even if they really don't mean it, they're going to say yes. That's all you can do. Because what happens, if people are willing to think about it, your goal is to change their antenna. That is, you want people to look for things that might reinforce that seed of change, as opposed to things that reinforce the narrative that's already set in stone. You can't do more than that, unless somebody has come to you and say, please educate me, which I'm still waiting for. All you can do is enlist them, plant a seed, and create some sort of verbal image.
Dr. Rossiter, the problem with Congress is everybody is begging for Congress to do something. They need to do something. And so with that framing that they need to do something about climate change, it accepts the idea that we are heading in the wrong direction, or that the atmosphere, or that the climate is we're 10 years away from irreparable harm and all that. So even in the framing of you must do something, or a lawmaker has to solve this problem, accepts a framing that maybe some of us in this room would reject. How do lawmakers deal with that? If they're not doing something, then it looks like they're on the wrong side. How do you work with lawmakers to try and get them on the right side without causing any more harm?
Well, we're in a really unique environment, in my experience, for successful propaganda campaigns, and I've lived through a lot of them. I was an anti-Vietnam War activist when the domino theory was believed by 95% of America. And we all know about weapons of mass destruction and Ronald Reagan's freedom fighters in Nicaragua. We all know successful propaganda campaigns. But this one is the best I've ever seen. It has completely captured the entire Democratic Party, the entire Democratic-oriented media, to such an extent that when I see my old friends from the Central America congressional days of the 80s, like Ed Markey, who's now over here in the Senate, or Jim McGovern, who's now head of rules, where he used to staff rules over in the House, we really can't talk. They can't be seen with me, because they will get caught on social media, and that'll just be a negative for them. But that's reflecting something important. Our audience is not, in fact, the Washington Post or our friends at E&E News or the Democratic Party or people who read the New York Times or watch CNN, because our stuff cannot get on CNN, be discussed by any Democrat without them being run out of the party. Our stuff cannot be in the Washington Post, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a different audience, it seems to me, and I've learned this in my 9 or 10 months now running the coalition here on the Hill. We essentially, in our staff, with our scientists and people we bring in from our members, We only talk to Republicans on the Hill because there's enough work for us to do there in terms of talking about the science. How do you decide there is a climate crisis? Remind members always to say that's a predicted climate crisis. It's an often predicted but never realized climate crisis. All the UN data show to date that we don't have any changes on the crisis variable since 1900. That's UN stuff. It's all about predictions. Even to get them saying that within the Republican Party would be a tremendous victory for us, because about half of Republican members of Congress simply find the easiest way out, would not go as far as our guest this morning in making critical comments, just saying, yes, we're going to deal with that issue. We have a different plan. So we have to think about who we're trying to reach. And all the media that we do, by the way, and I'm sure it's true for TPPF as well, down there with the good old Houston Chronicle. You know, all the media we do are in conservative-leaning print, journals, and radio and TV. So we're in a very small space now, and the question is, how do you use it? Do we expand into social media to reach people? I know a lot of people out there are open to a little skepticism about Armageddon, and they tend not to live in the West Coast or the East Coast. They're sort of stuck in the middle there. If they're lucky, they'll bump into Mandy and Mississippi, but the rest of these places we have to do something about.
And I'll pose this question to both of you, following up on that. Have the left given us an opportunity here with the Green New Deal, that it's so extreme and these predictions are so outlandish and fantastical that even just your average person who does believe in climate change or thinks we need to do more with the environment and water and all, but because the Green New Deal is so crazy and so obviously not even about the environment and it's about, you know, more unionization and all of these things, have they given us an opportunity, or at least those on the right, is this now an opportunity for us to really make up some ground with those folks who aren't on both of the coasts? And I'll pose to both of you.
Well, I'll quote our chair, the ecologist Patrick Moore, who says AOC is the gift that keeps on giving. I don't quite agree with him on that, because I think Ms. AOC has completely succeeded by driving the debate. Took a crazy idea called the Green New Deal and the end of fossil fuels, and it's now a major presidentially debated topic. So you can look at it one way or look at it at the other. The opportunity is there. This is the Katrina strategy. Al Gore pretty much invented it back with his movie in the mid-2000s, where you just take every horrible bit of weather you've ever seen and say it came because you were driving your SUV. Against all the science that's in the UN IPCC reports. This notion that all the temperature change in the last 150 years came from humans is directly contradicted by the IPCC. They say about 1/4 of a degree out of the 1 degree is all they can claim. Similarly, their rates of changes of hurricanes and droughts and floods, rate of sea level rise. This is not IPCC stuff to say there's a storm in New York Harbor and the water came up and it came from carbon dioxide. But that is a very successful tactic. Their narrative is winning about what Katrina, Harvey, you name your storm. People automatically think. I think when I go out in the morning, oh, it's a hot day today. I think, I wonder if that's part of a climate change trend. And I know it's not.
So Mary, do you see that we have a real opportunity here, or is this just more doubling down on a narrative that's winning?
Well, the people that I pay attention to, and we do a lot of polling, and I don't know whether it's good to admit this or not, but in the people that I'm talking to and looking at what they're thinking about, they don't care about climate change. I mean, if you look at the list of things that they're caring about, and this actually goes from the far right over to about the mid-Democrat. I mean, the list of issues that's on top of this is so big that climate change is way down there. So my advice is to look for people who you think will think about this, and whom you, again, as I said, you can plant a seed of reality, and people who will think about this. Most of our clients would think, they're probably not going to change their articulation, but they'll think about this. And then I try and look for anything I can to equip people with techniques. I love, big surprise, I love props. You can tell. Props also make great social media tools because you can tweet them out. This is, and I like newspaper articles because then you have the power of validation in the press. It's not me saying it, I'm holding it. This is a great article. Linear Labs. They are a Fort Worth-based company, and they have invented an electric motor that they are putting in air conditioners. I mean, who knew? That's what progress looks like. And these things make great things to tweet out. So I think you have to sort of pick your audience. I have all the respect for my friend who may be sitting on my right, but apparently is not there politically.
We could switch if you
And so I think you have to pick your battles.
I did want to talk a little bit about the polling. I'm glad you brought that up. We have a couple more minutes, and then we'll get to your questions. But there is a real disconnect in the polling. It is true that very few people say that it is a top priority when it comes to energy and environment. However, when you ask people about things like solar and wind, it has an 85% approval rating, and that's what a lot of people are using to say, well, we need to drive this policy, or we need to subsidize these things because this is what the people want. How do you combat something like that, where clearly it's not a huge issue for people if you just ask them randomly, but then when it's put in their face, they say, "Oh yeah, we want more of that."
Well, I think is that to me?
To either one of you.
Okay. I think that's you have to say that's a great idea. You want to end up like Green Georgetown, okay? Because what people say and what they're willing to vote on or pay become radically different. And the minute you put it to a vote and you say you want to pay X more for it, the numbers just fall out. It's a badly mixed metaphor, isn't it? They just fall out of bed, right? But
Well, thank you. And we are intimately aware of that issue. Georgetown, Texas, is just north of Austin, and our executive director, Kevin Roberts, actually lived in Georgetown when they put those policies in place, and he now lives in south of Austin. So we definitely know that they affect people. So we'll go to questions. I've got a couple I can start off with, but if anybody else out here, yes. Sure.
Over the last 20 years or so, the surveys done on the climate issue show that public opinion hasn't really shifted one way or another. You were right to say it's not really a big issue. You know, if you ask what are your main concerns, but if people are asked really about climate change, there's a party political split in the U.S. essentially more or less 50-50, around 50-50, and that hasn't really shifted at all. How do you explain that, and this question for you, that despite this kind of inundation of hyped up alarming stories in the media, which are getting shriller and shriller, people are not actually shifting their views on this issue?
Well, I hate to be the one to deliver bad news. I mean, but you've gotten a taste of it from me already with the HP commercial. Is that the awful truth is that facts don't matter. Okay? The even worse truth is that people don't read. Okay? Which means if you're going to try and tap them, you need images, storytelling. You need the network of person-to-person communication, and it's a very different way of thinking. And it's very frustrating to people who have substantive backgrounds because it drives them nuts. At my class at the Cox School of Business, I have graduate students. They're reading the same things that I was reading at Columbia Business School 35 years ago. The Economist, the Financial Times, and then I say, how many of you are reading them in hard copy? How many hands go up? None, right? And then about once a year or so, I will actually videotape them reading them. And they read this stuff on their phones, which I can, and they'll look at it and it will say a paragraph. Read more? Nah. Read more? Yeah. And then so they start reading. And then they start, and then they say, oh, Dr. Rossiter's involved with this. Hey, look at this. And they go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth while they're reading the material. Okay? It drives me nuts. But the implications for how we produce material are huge. And I've been nagging my clients about this for years because most of my clients are still putting out material rather than thinking about how people are consuming it. Mm-hmm. So that's not a very good answer to your question. It's sort of a description of the problem.
Dr. Rossiter, just a point of privilege. I wanted to get to this question, so I'll do it here. Looking at Republican lawmakers, it doesn't really feel like there's much of a fight. There's no legislative vehicles, or this doesn't feel like there's very many that sort of try to capture our messaging on the right. Have the Republicans ceded ground on this issue so much that we now can't go back to a more sane policy atmosphere?
The answer is no. The Republican Party has not really established a position, as far as I can tell. You have a lot of skepticism about alarm. That is just good gut in your bones. I don't always believe what I'm told by the New York Times and by the Secretary of Energy, sort of stuff. But you do have a movement, which I've been reading a lot about, in which climate activist-oriented, or at least for political purposes, House members in particular, are getting together on the Republican side for some sort of legislation that is going to put a tax. We heard the wonderful James Baker mentioned earlier, who I adored, of course, for his wonderful work at the end of the wars in Central America, but he is Mr. Carbon Tax, and he's got a lot of pull-up here with Mr. Schultz, and I think you will see legislation coming, at least to be introduced, to show, as Mr. McCarthy said, the leader in the House, we care. We want our younger voters to know we care about global warming. I think that's a very powerful strain within the Republican Party. But you have the other strain also on the Hill, where there are members willing to stand up and take on the science, take on the crazy economics. It's a bit of a battle within the House Republican caucus right now, and that's why information to be provided to them is so important. The Senate remains a great mystery to me and a disappointment to me, because the Republicans, actually, you may not have known this, are in control of the Senate. And they could be having a hearing every day, the way the House does, telling the other narrative about the wonderful TPPF messaging on energy and what it does for you and how we try to clean up the world, but it's good to get rich and live longer and have the money to do it. They could be having as many hearings as the House does, which pushes an alarmist narrative, and I believe they've done zero. Unfortunately, Mr. Inhofe, I think, is running Armed Services now, who used to really bear the torch and really had to learn the science enough to do it. So to me, the Senate has been a wasteland, and there's even rumors that, I won't say names, some staff have left the Senate who work on our issues and gone over to work in the House. Good Lord, to be in the minority? At least they know there's going to be action over there.
Well, we have time for probably one more question. Just want to tell a little anecdote about how much work we have to do on this issue. We did focus groups last year. We did 4 focus groups last year, the year before, and we just started off with a little light, chatting about the issues. And we asked everyone, where do you get your energy from? Where does power come from? And of course, people would say, that it comes from coal or it comes from gas. But every single one of the focus groups, somebody said electricity. And so we have a lot of work to do in terms of trying to get people to understand that the power doesn't come from the wall or from the socket. It actually comes from somewhere. So we have a lot of work to do on this. Yes, we have one last question.
Yeah, I hope this isn't too rambling a question. I'm kind of let me try and phrase it appropriately. You mentioned you've showed the population bomb in Paul Ehrlich's book. If you read that book, it's a very sinister book. He talks about increasing death rates around the world and restricting new technologies to poor countries. It was a very dark and sinister message that he had, and had impacts. It cost lives in poor countries. And if we're having a religious debate, I think you're seeing the same kind of sinister policies, although phrased better in this modern day. But if we're having a religious discussion, we have a better religion. We have the good facts, but our story is better. And I just trying to figure out how we sell this better religion. I mean, the Mayans had religion that involved sacrificing people. A better religion replaced it. Can we find a better science-based religion to replace this sinister, misanthropic religion that's being pushed at the moment?
Mary, yeah.
Is this how we have to end? Because it's not a question of science. It's a question, really, of confidence in American exceptionalism, of which science is a great part, but that's really a question of freedom. I mean, the country, what founded the country, in my view, and what's made us what we are, is the freedom as individuals to innovate and achieve success. And that's what's thrown off all these other things and you don't counter. I mean, the reason I love the population bomb is because you can ask people. I mean, it's the cover alone is just great copy. People starving, children dead. Then you say, did this happen? And everybody knows it didn't. So my goal in that is to shake the faith in the current dystopian projections, which are not going to happen either. But I don't think you counter that by science, because the science is yet to be invented. You counter it really by a belief in goodness and innovation, and a personal commitment and projection of that confidence. I'm
Yes.
sitting in a bunch of scientists. Oh, save me, Dr.
Yes.
Bassett.
I would think we should talk about vision. That is, their vision is the dystopian, the end of life. And I get this all the time. I talk to everybody I can, of course. I go across the country speaking and end up with a lot of liberal groups talking. And there is, as friends of mine on the left say, a sort of apocalyptic left, Malthusian left, Luddite left, hidden under many of my colleagues in the Democratic Party. It's a belief that, God, with all these people and all this stuff and all this gross overconsumption, of course we're going to run out of space and people. They do deeply believe in the Malthusian sort of Luddite vision. I think we have to have a better vision, and that's one of the things I've learned this year, in the last couple of years, working on the energy poverty videos with TPPF, and the way that message always resonates. If I'm testifying or giving a speech, and I start with the pictures of Africans in their huts burning dung while they cook and getting bronchial diseases and dying at age 55, that makes the left and the Democratic Party very nervous to see that. And they will end up saying things like, you won't believe it, in public. Okay, we know that fossil fuels did a lot of good for the world. We know that CO2 is a plant food. We know, but we've got this apocalypse coming. The fact that they're even willing to grant any discussion about the benefits of people living longer, giving their children more opportunity to go to college and live a good life in Africa, I think we have a vision. In honor of which, and of your home country, I wore my shirt today. Anybody know what this shirt's called in South Africa?
Is that the Mantiba?
It's a Madiba. It's a Madiba, which is Nelson Mandela's clan name. When Mandela got out of Robben Island, he didn't want to put a tie on very often, so he asked the greatest designers in South Africa, come up with formal attire I can wear anywhere and won't have to put a tie on. So this is called Madiba after him. And so the joke in South Africa is first he freed the black people so they could vote, and then he freed the white businessmen so they didn't have to put a tie on. We should be talking about what South Africa did for its people with a firm commitment after independence, which was to get universal electricity in the country, which they did, and they invested in that. And of course, with universal electricity, you can clean the water. Water takes a lot of pumping and repumping to get the water clean. And so South Africa is the only country in sub-Saharan Africa where there's essentially universal electricity, and you can drink the water. Everybody who goes there can drink the water without getting sick. These are huge achievements. It lets people live longer and their families can prosper. Probably somewhere in this messaging we're going to do, we have to talk about the benefits to families and children of using fossil fuels responsibly to increase your health and wealth so you can take care of the world.
Well, I don't have a Mandiba, but I do have an environmentally friendly green tie that I wore today for this panel. Well, thank you. Please help me thank our guests. And now we do have lunch. We have Chick-fil-A just on the other side of that wall, so you're all able to go get lunch at this time, and we'll break for about 15 minutes, and then we'll hear from our keynote.
All right, everybody, please make your way back into the room, and we're going to have a little video show for lunch. Before our keynote, Scott Tinker speaks. I'm Mike Nassy. I'm the director of Life Powered, so thank you for being here, everyone, and thank you for those that came last night. This is a little bit related to what we did last night, but one of the things that obviously you've already heard in spades today is the need for better communication. And Brian made reference to our polling, and Jason and others have made reference to the techniques we use. And of course, we just heard from real experts about the need to tell stories, use humor. And I will say that, I've known Scott Tinker, who Kathleen White will introduce here in a second after I introduce Kathleen, but I've known him for now, it's probably been 15, 16 years, and he has been a great communicator on these issues from the get-go, and obviously his game continues to elevate, and thank God for folks like him who are bringing, frankly, in a very polished and productive, in a high production way, and of course very science-based, awareness to this issue of the global challenge that we have and the resource realities we have. We have an energy poverty video, but I guess I'm very proud of our energy poverty video. It includes Caleb Rossiter. We showed the short version of that video. Go to lifepower.org, look at it, download the smaller pieces so that you can send it out. It has never ceased to really blow people away, but of course, compared to Scott Tinker speaking live, it really is kind of like the A-League. So I'm not going to show that video before we actually have Scott, like the A-game, in the room. But the important thing about energy poverty, as it relates to the polling, is this issue of, there are certain pockets of our population that are moved by certain issues and not moved at all by others. Geopolitics moves people over 50 really big on energy issues, not at all under 30. And maybe even under 40, right? And so what we see is the need to be multifaceted. And so the way I talk about it, I teach a class at the law school in Austin, and I do a couple other undergraduate, and I speak all over the country too. And I agree completely with Dr. Rossiter's comment about when you strike them with the reality of energy poverty and you actually tap into what I think, and I truly believe, every human being has, which is true empathy for the fellow man, that changes the dialogue, right? So that's what we're trying to do at Life Powered, is focusing on the positive. There are so many things to focus on that are positive, and everybody in this room has done so much already in their careers to direct attention to that positive message. What we're trying to do is just amplify that. So what I'm going to do right now is walk you through very briefly, because that's the beauty of these short animated videos, is that they are brief, because our social media team beats us about the head about how these messages are great and the facts are interesting, but it's almost impossible to get people to actually distribute things and even view them unless they're digestible. So we've made reference, and we can talk offline if you're more interested in hearing about it, the curriculum development that we're involved in, to play the long game of making sure that we actually have a growing population that knows more about electricity, not less. I come from a generation that basically, from what I can tell in talking to all of my colleagues, all we learned about energy from 1970 to 1999 was in a Schoolhouse Rock video. Okay? And so what you're going to find in this animated series is kind of a strange connection. And it's not an accident, because we just have made it modern. We have a gamification animation contractor that we use, and we basically have just taken a modular approach where we take one small issue at a time to build up to an ultimate, much more detailed discussion. So this very first video is intended to be an attention grabber for that target audience that is so device-driven, and a lot of comments were made already about the cloud, and Scott, I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but there's a little aspect of that. So let's show the very first of our series that we'll show this morning, which is now a 4-part series.
We use electricity for almost everything. We use it to wash our clothes, keep our homes comfortable, enjoy entertainment, and protect our food and medicines. Every day, we're adding new power-consuming devices that we're increasingly dependent upon. One of the fastest growing demands on energy is the cloud. a huge collection of wireless transmitters, data centers, and factories where devices are built, each with huge power demands. With all of our devices constantly accessing the cloud, along with new technologies like cyber and cryptocurrencies, we must continue to generate a massive flow of electricity just to keep our modern lives functioning.
So you see that, really simple, gets the attention, maybe gets them to realize that they have something to do with this electricity usage, and the fact that electricity usage isn't going away. That's a common myth. I deal with it all the time in the electricity business, is that our per capita usage is plummeting inside our homes, but we're not factoring in our outside the house cloud-based computing, and that's going to be a really important message moving forward. This second video is clearly the longest of the animated series, but it kind of couldn't be shorter. It's about 90 seconds, I think, and it is really designed to go after what Brian was talking about when we were in these focus groups. Where does your electricity come from? Or where does your power come from? Electricity, or the wall, or the plug. And this hints on, this edges on being a little nerdy, because it actually talks, oh my goodness, about a power plant. But if we can just get everybody to understand how it is that happens, and then use that imagery on a continual basis to reconnect them to where electricity comes from, we will have provided a big service. And Mary talked about asking questions to engage dialogue. You'll see in this series throughout, from here on out for sure, it's a question. It's not a know this, it's hey, where do we get our electricity? Hey, where do we get the fuels we rely upon? And that's the way the whole series is going to play out. So let's watch the second in the series.
The electric grid. It's the vast interconnected system that powers our modern lives. Electricity generated at a power plant travels through transmission lines, often spanning hundreds of miles. Once arriving at a local distribution system, it's routed through smaller lines that run directly into our homes and businesses. Each part of the electric grid is synchronized, functioning like a giant electrical machine where all parts are constantly communicating and working together. The supply of electricity can be turned up or down to meet the variable demands of our communities. But how do our power plants generate this electricity? Most of our electricity comes from large turbines that spin generators to create current. These turbines are powered by steam, created by heating water with natural gas, coal, and nuclear fission. We also spin turbines with water at hydroelectric dams, as well as quick-start jet engines and large engines like those used in marine vessels. Renewable energy, a growing part of our energy mix, comes primarily from wind farms and solar panels. These sources are not part of the synchronized grid, but instead contribute electricity intermittently. If there's no sun, like on rainy days or at night, or no wind blowing, other sources on the grid are required to ensure a constant flow of electricity. Battery technology is advancing to fill some of the gap, but physical constraints and economics make it impossible to displace the need for natural gas, coal, and nuclear power on our ever more interconnected lives.
So what you see is, little by little, we're building more knowledge, right? There's so much more we could have said and all that stuff, but you have to peel it down to its basics. So here we actually take the first of the next series of dives, which is where do we get the fuels that were referenced in the prior video? So let's look at that one.
Where do we get the fuel we burn that powers our electric grid? Millions of years ago, plants absorbed the sun's energy. When they died, they were eventually buried under the surface. Under the Earth's immense heat and pressure over millions of years, the stored solar energy intensified, resulting in a set of energy-dense fuels like natural gas and coal. We use a wide range of technologies to locate, access, and bring these fuels to the surface. These fuels are then transported through pipelines, railways, and rivers, where they are processed and used in our power plants.
So the next in the series, really logically, is the video we have not yet made, and that is, okay, so how do we actually, it's a little bit more of a discussion of how it's not just some magical icon that comes from the ground, right? How do we do that? And we're going to do that, and this is really an important point that Scott makes, is that we've got to talk about how we get all of the stuff that makes all of this stuff. So we'll talk about what makes the solar, what makes the wind, where do we get all this stuff. Oil comes more into the question in full force in that video yet made, but the script is on my computer and we're going to get it done in the next couple months. But we wanted for this event, because we wanted to brand this event as an energy density discussion, to get this video done. And it is really the next in the logic after that discussion, really, and it is a topic of, okay, so what is it that led us to use these fuels in the beginning, and how does that relate to what we can use in the future? So let's walk the most recent in the series. This is a world premiere.
Why do we rely on fuels like coal, natural gas, and nuclear to power our electric grid? A lot of it has to do with energy density, or how much land we need to produce a given amount of energy. Years ago, we depended on wood for our energy needs. Wood is much less energy dense than coal or natural gas, meaning we had to burn a lot of it to meet our needs. Deforestation became a huge problem, but once we learned to use modern fuels, our forests recovered. So you might be thinking, why can't we just replace fossil fuels with renewables like wind and solar? Energy density is crucial. To equal the power output of a single plant using fossil fuels, it would take thousands of acres of land filled with industrial wind turbines and solar panels, as well as a huge network of transmission lines. The massive land usage would have enormous impact on rural communities and on the habitats of threatened and endangered species. The land needs are even greater because wind and solar is intermittent. We would need to build extra wind turbines and solar panels and deploy large amounts of energy storage to provide energy when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining. Our use of renewables will continue to advance thanks to the support of energy-dense fuels like natural gas, coal, and nuclear, as they all work together to power our ever more interconnected lives.
Well, so thank you for letting me take you through this fun animated series. So like I said, we're going to talk about where fuels come from. We're also going to talk about how we actually capture and control pollution from the processes, both making electricity and developing these resources, and then ultimately get into some maybe more international issues, talk about geopolitical issues, as well as a little bit what we have some videos that do a great job of connecting people's daily lives to the stuff that the stuff they use all the time, to the petrochemicals that they're relying upon. We might do that in the animated series as well. So that's what's coming. What I would ask, and I asked some of this of everyone last night as well, if you have ideas, if there's something you think would be a really good topic, please let us know. We don't have infinite funding. We'd welcome more funding for animated videos too. You're welcome to do that. But ideas are everything in terms of what drive the equation. So we are always going to test and evaluate what is most urgent in terms of what the polling tells us, but also we want our experts and our friends that are those among us here to give us their input about what they see out there and what is the real lack of knowledge. And clearly the things that we're talking about all morning drove why we made the videos we've already made, right? So with that, I'm going to turn to introducing my good friend and longtime colleague, and the reason, frankly, we're all here. I'm not going to put that on everybody, but I think maybe everybody would agree with this, and that is that Kathleen Hartnett-White, who did a whole bunch of stuff before she wrote Fueling Freedom, but we created this initiative as the Fueling Freedom Initiative before we rebranded based on, frankly, polling and focus grouping to be called Life Powered. But Kathleen has been extraordinary, academic, regulator, thought leader, and just a painstaking researching, substantive force of our efforts for years now. I'm not going to read her long bio other than to tell you that she used to keep me in check as an environmental regulatory lawyer, because she was the longtime chairman and commissioner, then chairman of our Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. Its predecessor agency was also a Water Development Board servant as well, and then she's been on the LCRA board in Austin. been a huge part of energy policy and frankly, not just in Texas, but nationwide, again, with her book, Fueling Freedom, and the work that she does with us and with most of the experts that we have around us are thanks to relationships she's built. So thanks to Kathleen Hartnett-White, who will come up and introduce our keynote.
In addition to introducing and which and other ways have had Scott 2 times, but all the merrier, I say. So I'm going to abbreviate the his introduction. It's so sticking in my mind right now. One of the sources for my book, Fueling Freedom, Exposing the Mad War on Energy, was a front page of some sort of periodical from the European Union. And the headline said, I think this is a juicy one, Mary, 4 million Europeans must decide between heating and eating. I kept thinking, they got their zero off or something here, and went back to make sure that there was a solid reference. But that, it suggests something is happening that we would not have believed not very long ago. I mean, and we're having, power plants in California turned off before people knew they were. So a taste of the dark side, but really something that to me communicates the stakes of the issue. And I keep thinking about that with Mary's review. So it seems something is more than very near to us. It's on the front door. But anyway, I was really motivated to write this book. I wrote a real short version of it, and several people far more published than I am and all that said, you've got a book. And Regnery Publishing was the publisher, but it's really as if in each chapter, really one of the categories of things we talked about, whether it was how to be clean, but not, to be out of business because of that. I want to thank, but before, where's Scott? Oh, there you are. I'm proud, really proud of that man, and he has done so much in his life in pursuit, if you will, of something sane in the energy policy realm or in the geological thing. And I think maybe, Mandy, you might have already gone through his incredible prolific car, but I can't resist the last one. He's besides a highly respected, whether you're geologist or geophysicist, but somehow found time to do all kinds of things like award-winning videos, films that really try to educate people in a way. I look at you as I compliment you, but you have a real gift of being able, I think, to intertwine the issues surrounding climate that have, very, very much tied to, basic values, as well as all the high-tech things that go on. So I'm very, very pleased that you joined us here. And it looks we're going to get a exciting presentation, and I haven't even seen the video. So I'm thankful that you're a Texan, and I really thank you for all you've done, and I hope a whole lot more comes to addressing the issue as we've done here today. Thank you.
Thanks. Actually, I'd just like to sit down now after that. I really appreciate that. Thanks for sticking around for Chick-fil-A. Let's talk about a story. It's triple lines in Texas for Chick-fil-A at lunch to the drive-thru. Three lines. It's chicken. Anyway, we're able to tell these stories. If we could get some slides up, that'd be great. And I'm pleased to be here today. I used to come to Washington a lot more than I do now. About a decade ago, I decided my efforts were best spent elsewhere, working more broadly with the public, with educators globally. Not that this isn't productive, it just wasn't quite fitting into what my real passion is. And I got asked actually to be Assistant Secretary of Energy under Obama in the first term and met with Mr. Chu. Steve and I sit on a board together now. And we visited, but it was right when the shale revolution was taking off, and he wasn't that interested at that time in natural gas. I think that's changed some. But certainly, being Secretary of Fossil Energy, natural gas was a big piece of it. And it just wasn't the right thing for me personally. But it's good to be here today. And I want to talk about this political paradox. So we're going to start big. Start with the whole world. And ask ourselves, here we sit in arguably the center of the global impact, many would think and argue. And I promise I'm going to get your intentions by the time I'm done off these phones and computers. I promise you. But in the meantime, I'm watching you. So what are these big issues? What are the big issues we all face? So these are some of them. This is a dozen big global issues that the world... And I think we all agree on these. That's what I said this morning. I think we all agree that these are big challenges facing the world, but I'd like to ask you, look at that list and ask you, what's the one thing on there that affects everything else on the list? Around which, actually, we can't do those, and I'm biased, you're probably biased a little bit too, but it's energy. Energy underpins our ability to do all of these things. Lack of it impacts it negatively. So let's start with us, people. Population density map of the world. Red is really dense in terms of people. And there are places in the world that white. You know, I'm highlighting some of them. There just aren't many of us there for reasons that we'll talk about. Other places there are. Let's look at global income. This shows a range of global incomes, and there's the places we can't figure out global income because there's not many people. There are people there, but averages don't really mean much. Now, if we start coming across the bottom, that's $3 a day. That's severe poverty. And let's go up to $10 a day. And so the yellows and the reds on the map, $10 a day. I'll spend more than that today at Starbucks. I will, okay, because I'm flying today and I have to have a lot of caffeine. $10 a day. Where are those places? Well, they're everywhere, but they're particularly concentrated in these areas under the yellow ovals. Okay? Now, I filmed some of these places in the last year. We went to Ethiopia, where I talked about this morning, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. We went to Colombia and brought for solar, distributed renewable. Sorry. I will not be able to stand here. I promise. Yeah, I'll do a handheld if we could, if one works. Good. So here we are in Colombia Indigenous Village. Vietnam, big challenges, but heading toward coal. This is Nepal, where they're cooking indoors with wood and dung. And finally, here in Kenya, and this is Kibera, which is the largest slum in Africa, outside of Nairobi. Over 1 million people living under the grid, if you will, without being able to afford much electricity. So keep going up to 12 grand, $1,000 a month. And that's the low end of the highest sector here. Let's call it level 4, like Hans Rosling does. $1,000 a month. It goes much higher than that. Where are those blue areas? Well, they're not spread around that far, are they? And they're there, but take a look kind of relative to some geography, just to get us thinking. Where are the blues and where are the yellows? We might think it's related to the population density. Here are the blue areas. Well, it's pretty dense and rich. And there are places where it's not that dense and rich. And here are the poor areas, pretty dense, and some less dense. So not really tightly tied to density of people. What might it be tied to? This is temperature of the earth today. And you can see those areas where not many people live, it's hot or it's really cold. We don't live there in those areas. Where's it wealthy? Just right. The greens and the blues. Goldilocks. It's just right. Okay. And where is it poor? Where it's hot. We don't live some places, but we live in a lot of those places. And there are those that are concerned, we blank out the wealth. It's interesting when you see, they're pinned, aren't they, between the tropics at Kepler and Cancer. 20 degrees north, 20 degrees south. 2 degrees warming will hurt the world's poor. 2 degrees C. It'll add about 10% to that high end of heat, and it will. Where it's already inhospitable, become even more inhospitable. Houston's inhospitable in the summer. Without what? Energy. So is Stockholm, Sweden. We've mentioned people from there today. In the winter, without what? Energy. You can't see. It's dark and it's cold. So let's think about this. Let's take a look at energy. Energy in the world, a composite satellite photo at night. Can we turn these lights off? I didn't warn you about it, but could we kill these lights up here just so we can see this screen a little bit better? That'd be great, thanks. So look at the tropics, north and south. You can see where nobody lives. It's dark. There's no electricity. Where's it rich? Where are the lights? The lights are on where it's wealthy. In fact, nocturnal luminosity, lights at night, versus GDP. Every country in the world, it's not a perfect correlation, but it's pretty strong. The more light you have at night, the wealthier you are. GDP. Where is it poor? Where it's dark? No energy. Yes, India has some, but it's weaker light. You can see that. Okay, so as we fade these out, energy warming hurts the world's poor, but energy helps them. Energy allows us to control our climate. It's what allows us to do what we do today. We are in this room comfortably because of that. Can't function without it in a modern society. So there's three kinds of people in the world. Those who are good at math and those who aren't. Which are the three are you. So here we go. This is some simple math. Here's the average Ethiopian, kilowatt hours on up through the average Kenyan, a couple countries we visited. Kilowatt hours might mean something to you. What's it really mean, energy poverty? Well, the average Ethiopian consumes 1/9 as much energy as my fridge. My fridge consumes 3 times more electricity than the average Kenyan in a year. I have 2 fridges. I'm a geologist. I drink beer. Got to have a beer fridge. That's energy poverty. How bad is it? 1 billion people today without electricity. The trends are good. Again, read Factfulness. Good trends going on in reduction of energy poverty, but still 1 billion. How many is 1 billion? Well, this is a map of the world's population. The colors are about 1 billion each. All the Western Hemisphere. Throw in South America and New Zealand, or Australia and New Zealand. It's about 1 billion people. Everybody you've ever seen in North and South America without electricity in the world today. We're not evenly distributed. And how about this cooking challenge? Sanakanchi in Nepal, who we spent quite a bit of time with, and her 5 kids. She's 35, has cataracts. Cooking inside with wood is like smoking 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes every day for you and your children. It kills over 3 million people a year, which is more than malaria and AIDS combined. Who knew? It's solvable right now. 2.6 billion people. 1/3 of the world is doing this today. The trends are better, but 1/3 of the world. If you look at severe poverty, that $3 a day bid across the bottom against the electrification rate of the country, is there a grid? Is there electricity at least in your area? Not saying you can afford it, but in your area. In South America, Latin America, mostly electrified, 10 to 20% severe poverty. The size of the circle proportional to population, Brazil being the largest. Here comes Asia, same population scale, less electrified, more severe poverty, and finally Africa. Now, correlation isn't causation, but there's a real strong relationship between lifting yourself from poverty and access to energy. Energy underpins that ability. It's a paradox. Energy won't end poverty, but you can't get out of poverty without energy. And that's one of the great paradoxes. Another way to look at this, I just finished this this morning, this graph, GDP per capita along the bottom. So that levels 1 through 4 against how much electricity you consume per capita. I've put about 15 countries or so. This is in 1990. Look in the lower left corner, China and India. No electricity consumption and essentially no GDP per person. Some severely wealthy people, to be sure, but on the average. And look where South Korea and the U.S. is in the upper right. Now let's fast forward to 2015 and watch the countries start to move. Moving to the right, the rich countries are doubling their GDP without increasing their energy consumption much. But then all of a sudden, here comes Saudi Arabia and South Korea, lots of energy, more wealth, Malaysia. But then Mexico and Ecuador and Brazil, not as much progress. China moves up and India barely. Isn't it interesting? Still a strong correlation, but look at the change in position. All move to the right, which is good, better GDP, energy consumption. But look at that trend. The big ones. India, China, South Korea, us, representing. You need energy. You need energy to get out of poverty. We made this film called Switch. Remarkably popular, still playing in thousands of campuses, 50 countries. We passed 15 million viewers. It puts us way up in the most watched films of all time. Not just documentaries, top 300 or 400. But it's remarkable how many still haven't seen it. I'll bet most of this room. Okay. But faculty and teachers are showing it every year. Energy was the star. We went to 11 countries, where's the energy best, and featured the pros and cons. Real nonpartisan, very objective. There it is. But as I've been speaking, I realized we left out half the world, essentially. The 4 billion people, not all in energy poverty, but live in this part of the graph. And what do they want to do? They want to do what we've done. They want to grow and industrialize, and they need energy to do it. Now, it'd be great if they could do it differently, if they could grow and industrialize without consuming as much energy, and we could get more efficient. We've been talking about density and efficiency today. Bring that consumption per person down and then in the aggregate down, and it's possible. There's technologies that are doing that now, but it's time to power the people. The economy, the environment, energy. I've been speaking about this for a couple decades now. The waltz of the 3 E's, I've called it all sorts of different things. There it sits, land, water, air, the atmosphere. Climate change is important, to be sure, but it's not the only environmental thing. The economy. What are we doing here? Poverty, competition, growth. And on the energy side, I just broke it fossil, nuclear, and renewable. Break that out a lot of different ways. It's complicated. Social, legal, political systems, it's complicated. They're very interactive. It engages everyone. We all have strong opinions. It's not easy space, that overlap space, that radical middle. Okay. It's not easy. But it's where the action is. It's where things could actually have a chance to get solved. And it takes critical thinking. You have to look at the pros and cons. You have to look around the issue and be willing to be wrong and adjust and adapt some of your thinking. If I color these differently, I made them blue and red for a reason. The Democrats kind of control the environmental conversation. Republicans like to control the economic conversation. And Republicans like fossil nuclear, Democrats like renewable. Isn't it interesting? Isn't it silly that we polarized ourselves like this and allowed it to continue? That conversation continues that way. Here's the map of the world's population again. That's the energy mix in the world today. And all my slides are color-coded. Green's oil, red's gas. We're going to look at some data in a fun way. Gray's coal, etc. It's 85% fossil fuels. Does it vary around the world? Yeah. Some. North America is a lot like the global mix. A little more gas. Europe, a little more coal. Russia, a lot of natural gas. We know that. South America has topography and rainfall, more blue. Hydro. Africa, more gray coal. The Middle East will shock you. Oil and gas. They're building a little nuclear, looking at some solar. Look at Southeast Asia. Look at the colors. Every color is 1 billion people. 1, 2, 3, 4 billion that get half their energy from coal. It's not electricity. That's energy, all energy from coal. I'm going to shrink these and grow these to be proportional to demand. Half the world gets half their energy from coal. That's more than the rest of the world combined, times 3 in coal. Okay? Now that's the data. That's where we are today. And has it changed through time? Yeah, it's all gone up. We've gone up 365% since 65 in the amount of energy we consume. Now, coal and oil proportionally are lower than that growth rate. Natural gas and hydro are higher. Natural gas is a lot higher. The world is consuming more gas and replacing coal and oil with it. Mostly coal. What else has gone up? We have. Population. We're headed toward 11 billion. UN mid-range projection. Who consumes energy? We do. Correlation is causation. We consume energy. If you color code it by where, it turns out 80% of the world, you've seen the map now, live in Africa and Asia. 4 out of every 5 people. They consume less than half the world's energy. The rest of us, the 20%, consume more than half because we're wealthy. We are developed. It's lifted us into the modern world. Now, you will hear the world could be wind, water, and solar if it was just for political will. I'm not commenting on the politics, but I want to look at the physics and the economics. I modeled it out by when? I said by 2065. What if we were essentially wind, wave, and solar? That's one version. You could model this a lot of different ways. How's that look to you? And some are saying by 2040. How's that look to you? Is it even possible? Or is it a good idea? So this conversation, we have to ask ourselves, when we're saying it, is it doable? And what would be the impacts of it? Maybe it'll be 75% renewable. Maybe it'll be 50% renewable by 2065. Maybe 25% renewable. That'd be called business as usual. Why? Because oil, gas, and coal are just slightly declining, and all the new demand from industrialization and population growth will be made up by renewables and some nuclear. Okay? Business as usual. Is it? Let's look at it differently. That's the data. This is in million tons of oil equivalent. It doesn't matter. It could be in TCFs, exajoules, pick your favorite energy unit, kilocalories. Okay. Let's look at the exact same data as a percentage. There it is. A percentage of the energy mix. It turns out that business as usual, coal and oil are cut in half. Natural gas and nuclear double. Renewables go up 4-fold. Look at the left side, look at the right. Do they look the same? Not at all. That's going to be challenging. A 25% renewable world by 2065 is non-trivial. It's not business as usual. The right side of that in pure emissions terms is a lot lower than the left as a percentage of the mix. The actual units are still growing. So where does CO2 come from? We talk about it a lot, and we act like we know these boxes are scaled to the size. So here we are with our industrial uses and segregated. Transportation makes CO2. Heating and cooling makes CO2. Making power certainly does, and others. And then forestry and ag. It turns out forestry and ag make as much CO2 almost as all of power generation. But we tend to focus on these two, about half of it, power gen and transportation. What else makes it? the videos you're streaming right now. Videos on demand, tube videos, porn, you know, you add it all up, 300 million tons a year. And it's growing really fast. Every time you stream a video, a data center is whirring and bringing that to you. That's more CO2 than all the trains on the planet times 1.5. And it will soon pass other things, big things. Where's it coming from? Well, North America and Europe have been flat. We've been flat for 40 years in our CO2 emissions, and we're going down. Pat ourselves on the back. Where's it going up? Asia. A lot. And then the rest of the world, the poor part, not too much, because they don't have much energy. Bad, bad Asia. I can't believe Asia makes all that CO2. Can you? What do we get from Asia? Everything. Everything. We have moved our manufacturing. We buy cheap products. We've moved everything there. So while we're bringing in stuff, what are we effectively exporting? Carbon dioxide to them. Because there's only one atmosphere in the world. One. If I'm putting it up in Asia, it's in the one atmosphere. If I make a unit of stuff in Asia, is it better or worse in terms of actual emissions than if I made that unit of stuff here? It's worse. The emissions controls are not the same. So while we're busy going to 100% zero emissions in our states and moving our stuff over there, what are we doing to the one atmosphere? We're increasing the CO2 emissions. It's not decreasing it. What are carbon taxes going to do? Read my piece in Scientific American just about a month or two ago. What are carbon taxes going to do? They're going to increase the price. Simple economics say increase price, decrease demand or supply, all good. No. That's not what happens with a carbon tax. It makes it more expensive, so we get it from over there. Okay? Because we're not going to have a single price on carbon in the world. Even with border taxes and other adjustments that a lot of my right friends think will happen. I disagree. So although carbon taxes feel good, and hell, we're in Washington, everybody likes a new tax. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on or what you pretend, you all like new taxes. And they don't get used to address the thing, typically, that's the problem. Look at nuclear waste. How's that going? Okay? So let's talk about electricity. Who consumes the most? China, then the US, then these other countries. Just actual total consumption of electricity per country. Who's number 3? Who's missing? Who are we missing here? It turns out it's the tech sector. Tech consumes more electricity than any nation on earth by a lot, and it will pass the United States. Just look around. Look at yourselves, okay? Everybody, the kids. This is my daughter's soccer game. There was a game going on. Oh yeah, we saw that goal. Who's playing? You know, pets are on them. Yo, this thing we call the cloud. Jeff Bezos, AWS. It's not a cloud. It's a massive set of interconnected demand centers that consume 3% of the world's electricity and growing. You know how, this is on their website, it's a snowmobile. You know how you move data from one center to another? Not on the cloud. It's too big. With trucks that are loaded with thumb drives, or the equivalent of. You load it up in a week or two and drive it for redundancy. Check it out. And this good old Bitcoin thing, 73 terawatt hours and growing. That's more than Austria, more CO2 emissions than Denmark from Bitcoin. All these digital things we're doing, they matter. It seems clean. It seems low emissions. It's not. Amazon, with the cloud and its delivery systems. When you get 2 things delivered to your door, it's awesome. I needed a banana and some diapers. Great. 1 at a time delivery. Are you kidding? In terms of efficiency? By region, here we are. North America and Europe have been flat for 20 years in our electricity consumption. Who's going up? Asia. And it's not a surprise. They're growing in their massive population economies. In fact, the kink was when China really kicked off in the early 2000s, and again, the rest of the world, not too much. How's it made? Coal. Coal demand in the electric sector is continuing to grow. You saw the video. Burn coal, boil water, make steam, turn a turbo on a generator. Thermal power. Burn oil in some places still. Burn methane a lot more than used to be. In fact, a lot of the kink in demand is fossil thermal. We're growing our nuclear mostly in Asia. Growing our hydro mostly in Asia and Africa. And there's solar and there's wind and there's the geothermal part. That's it. So where electricity comes from. We don't grow it. We don't mine it. We make the electrons. They don't come from a wall. And coal has been coming down in North America and Europe tremendously. We built our economies on coal, and now we're reducing. We become more wealthy. We're substituting other fuels. Not so Asia. Look at it. This is why it's 3x the rest of the world combined. And then the rest of the world, I'm laying it on there, not much coal anywhere else. Some don't have it, some aren't using it. That's 250% growth in coal for power gen since 1985. 250. How about on the methane side? It's 400% growth, and it's a lot more broadly distributed. It's not just Asia. Everyone is increasing their use of natural gas. 400%. If I look at coal and put natural gas on top of it at the same scale, you see the ratio of gas to coal has gone from 38 to 61%. This is a good trend. When you start replacing coal with natural gas, I'm talking about for CO2 emissions, you lower them. It's just math. Yes, methane still leaks. Yes, it's still CO2 emissions, but in terms of what can be done today, quickly and at scale, that works. It's been working in the United States. We have data to show that. Solar is growing more quickly than any form of electricity. It's exponential growth still, and it's broadly distributed. The costs have been coming down on the solar panels. It's true we're starting to get to the bottom of that cost curve. Not a lot more room to become cheaper on the panel side. Wind is growing exponentially. Remarkable growth in both of these. Now what's the challenge here? This is total electricity by source. I'm going to lay wind on top of it. You can see wind is growing more steeply. So when you hear renewable energy, solar and wind, are growing more steeply than electricity demand, it's true. Their rate of growth is much steeper. But what does that miss? And they're getting cheaper, but what does it miss? Here's a little hint. What are we missing? We're missing a whale. We're missing scale, right? Scale. So let's scale these the same. Here we go. Remember, wind is in the graph. It's the light yellow up on top. In 15 years, we've built the best wind first. We go to the best resources for everything. Oil, gas, uranium, thorium, wind and solar. We build them first. Ask Texas. 15 years to get there. This is just electricity, and wind is only for electricity. Are we going to replace oil, gas, and coal with wind? 10 years? 20? 30? When? It doesn't even meet the increase in global demand for electricity. The increase. We've got to count. Okay? We have to be willing to count, because that will allow us to have some conversations. Can solar, wind, and batteries address climate change? How long do we have, according to the climate modelers and their models? 10 years, 15, 20, 30, 40, Will these address climate change? They can't. I'm not a climate denier. I'm an energy believer. Okay? It won't address climate change. It'll help, but we need other things that are bigger sooner. Well, maybe the electric car will do it. This is a Beamer, electric, and the license plate says electrons. Very proud of that, because they're charging it with diesel. Those are diesel generators making electricity. Right there at the site, we've lost the thread. Okay? Now, let's look at the actual EVs. They're growing exponentially. Over 2 million produced last year. Who made the most? China, more than the rest of the world combined. Where does China get its electricity? You've seen the data. Are the EVs in China green? It matters. It matters where you get your electrons when you charge your battery. What happens in the atmosphere that I care about. It matters. Okay? They're not. Nonetheless, Bloomberg, I have many forecasts, and I've made some awful ones myself. This is Bloomberg. Here's the actual growth. You've seen it now to 2 million. They say we're going to go to 60 million by 2040, and the pink color on top is other. That's the others who are going to be making electric vehicles. What's missing on this graph? Scale. Let's scale the actual to the graph. That's what we've done, and here's where we're headed. That's 60 million a year. The area under that curve is 600 million. It's about half the world's current vehicle fleet. The Tesla S has 7,200 batteries in it. 7,200 lithium-ion batteries to make up the battery pack. And they're awesome vehicles. If you haven't driven a fully electric vehicle, it's awesome. I'm not against EVs. I want to think about batteries. 600 million, let's just use 5,000 per car is 3 trillion. And again, 3 trillion is a big number, not in terms of deficit, I guess. We're used to that. But yeah, again, for those of you who weren't here this morning, I'm going to count with you 1001, 1002, 1003. 96,000 years to get to 3 trillion. 96,000 years of seconds. Where are they going to come from? Nonetheless, this proud Tesla owner in Colorado, just taken a month ago, no oil. No tires. Colorado loves what? They love mining. They're going to go back proudly to mining because batteries come from mines. The metals and the materials that we use to make batteries and turbines and panels come from mines. I took this picture north of Butte this summer, and these are big. These are big things. Here's our Statue of Liberty. We'll put her to scale. Let's fly across the pit to the other wall and see something that we can recognize, a drilling rig and a big, big shovel. That's a 16-story building in the color bar, and here's a miner. Put the miner to scale. Walk him over to the rig. See, he's moving toward the rig. I had a hell of a lot of fun. I sat by Secretary Perry on the plane yesterday. We were both in row 8, coach class. Talking about fun things. We go back a long way. But anyway, this is big. These are big. Okay, and it's not just the impact of the whole. And I'm a geologist. I love mining. If we don't grow it, we mine it. But let's recognize what we're going to be doing as we make 3 trillion batteries. The lithium and cobalt demand today, that's just for your cell phones and a few other things that sometimes work and sometimes don't. Wait till we put them in cars from gigafactories. It's a cool name. Elon Musk, man, I want him to name everything for me. A gigafactory. Are they renewable? Are the solar panels and the turbines and the batteries renewable? They're not. You have to mine them, make them, deploy them, recycle, refurbish, and then dispose them. And then you do it again. It's just a different way to collect energy. We're collecting oil and gas with a bunch of stuff right now, not renewable. Same thing for So what's the impact of all this? Are solar and wind green and fossil fuel? That's the narrative. Your kids learn in school there's good, clean energy and bad, dirty energy. That's what's taught. I've seen the lesson plans. What does that mean? Well, I know that oil and gas and coal are dirty. First part of the question. Look. And it always has been. It's getting better in the rich countries. You got to make the stuff. You've got to drill and complete. You got to handle the water. We got some earthquakes down in Texas now. We put in TexNet. It's being handled well. Transportation, pipelines are pretty popular, right? Refining, petrochemicals, and you burn it. You burn it to do useful work, and 85% of the world's energy comes from this. It has a big impact. It scares people. We can't minimize this story. It scares people. They feel like they're running the bulls, and they're this person. The winner of the last photo taken contest, right there. I'm going to show you the runner-up. Here we go. Here's the clean stuff. Let's look at the good and clean energy. Oh, wait. You have to mine and process that? Got to make it? Turbines, panels, batteries. Have you been inside a solar manufacturing plant? Got to use a lot of land, transmission. We got to move it. Texas has 5 345 kV power lines that go from where the wind is to where we need it. And then you got to put it somewhere. Landfill disposal on a scale unprecedented. Is it clean? It's just different. Runner-up, last photo taken contest. Hey, look what I got. Let me start to wrap. Do policy intentions always result in desired outcomes? So here's Germany. Nuclear and natural gas were growing. Coal was coming down. Wind was growing steadily, and CO2 emissions were coming down till about a decade ago. And then something happened. Another documentary came out called Gasland, a very powerful one, not very factual, but very powerful. Scared people about hydraulic fracturing, hasn't proven to be, the impacts haven't happened, but a very powerful film. Fukushima Daiichi happened, and then Energiewende. I call it 2.0. Energy policy in Germany said we're going to slow the gas, no fracking, slow the nuclear, turns out grow the coal again. Taken physical delivery from North America for a while from Powder River Basin. What happened? Wind went up more steeply. Look at the CO2 emissions. They were coming down. They have a wedge of positive CO2 as a result of good intended policy, well-intended policy. And the other thing that happened is the price went up. You put more intermittent energy in the whole mix, you have to back it up, as so well described this morning. It costs money to have redundant things around, batteries or plants waiting. They're more expensive. You mix that in. You see it in Texas too, in ERCOT. The price of gas spikes way up when the wind's not blowing in the summertime. And just last week, out comes the article. Thousands lose jobs as German wind crisis hits ERCOT. Welcome to scale. Sounds like the oil business. Intentions, outcomes. These folks had good intentions. They were putting in posts to keep people from parking next to the building. Okay. They kind of forgot where they parked. You in D.C. often forget where you park. You put in good regulations and policies that are well intended, but they don't always work. And you won't pull them out. You won't pull out the posts. Because it's political suicide to be a flip-flopper or to change or to think something different when it doesn't work. We got to get rid of that. We have to be able to do things and adapt and improve and change as the results come in. So we got energy. It underpins the economy. And guess what? It takes a healthy economy to invest in the environment. I've been very fortunate to be in 65 countries in the world, and the absolute worst environments on the planet are where it is poor. They simply can't afford to clean it up. There's no regulatory schemes or policies. The governments are unstable. This This is Kibera, outside of Nairobi. There are some girls coming home from school here. That's just a river of garbage. The water, the soil, the local air, where it's poor, is awful. We've got to lift it up for the sake of the environment. So this energy transition, what is it? How can we address climate change and energy poverty? Well, natural gas replacing coal will start. And if we could capture the CO2 emissions from natural gas and put it back, store them, big topic, was 20 years ago, it's back, CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. It's expensive. Got a leading team that's been working on it 20 years at the Bureau. It's back. Nuclear, no emissions, dense, low footprint, manage the waste. Coal, and substituting coal with other things. Geothermal and hydro, if you have them, wonderful. We feature them a lot in Switch. Centralized wind, like we have in Texas and other places, it's great if you've got it. If you got the resource, you got to back it up. Distributed renewables. I mean, these people down in, 1 billion people in the world, they don't have roads, they don't have lights, they don't have pipelines. The only way to get them electricity is DRE today. And then efficiency and conservation. We can use less and still do more. That's the list. And it's in order of impact. And I reserve the right to change my mind and improve. But that's in order of impact today at scale. Now take a look at it again. I'm going to gray out the first three. Natural gas, nuclear, and coal to address climate change and lift the world from poverty. How's that going to play, Republicans? Let me just ask you Republicans this. Democrat, your turn's coming. Climate change is happening. Humans are causing it. The impacts will be negative. Solar, wind, batteries, a global price on carbon, stricter environmental regulations, a ban on drilling on U.S. federal lands, and a ban on fracking will solve it. Take that back to your bosses. How would that play? I'm only going to change 2 words on this slide. The upper right one in yellow and the underlined one. Ready? Here we go. How will this play for Democrats? Those things won't solve it. Take that back to your bosses. These things are all happening, but those things won't solve it. How would that play? Let's do another one. Energy poverty impacts more than 2 billion people globally. Coal, oil, natural gas, this is for Democrats, and nuclear will be used to provide the majority of the energy required to allow nations to address it. Take that back. Coal, oil, natural gas, and nuclear. That's what addresses energy poverty. How's that going to play? I'm only going to change 2 words. Republicans and won't. Take it back. They won't be used to provide the... Do you see the problem? You see the paradox? The challenge is, to me, that the solutions don't line up with the politics of the passions. So here we sit with this climate, poverty, sustainability, political paradox. And we yell at each other. It's really impressive when you're out there in the country listening to it, by the way. And it happens at all scales. It happens in our schools. It happens in our local governments. It happens in federal governments. It happens in industry. It happens in NGOs. It's happening everywhere. So here we go with the radical middle. Are we going to just continue to do this? Are we going to pull ourselves apart? Is that really the solution in the U.S. and Western Europe? Is that really the solution? Or are we going to grow the radical middle? Are we going to make it bigger? Are we going to engage? How many Democratic staff are here today in the room? How many Republican staff? Okay. So people can't see. It was 0 and a few. Okay. Reduce impacts of all forms of energy on all parts of the environment. They all have them. All forms of energy impact all forms of the environment. They're just different. End poverty, underpin the economy. Coal to gas, clean up fossils, nuclear, DRE, and efficiency. That's how we begin to address this. That's a sustainable transition. but it requires nonpartisan energy education and critical thinking. Or it won't work. That's just my opinion as a scientist and a voter. Is the global energy transition really from fossil fuels to something else? That's what it's being described as. Is it really a switch from a set of fuels to another set of fuels? Are we really going to do that? You've seen this before and you've seen these data. Let me scale them correctly. Now you not only know where the lights are on, you know why. Because they have energy. And if we truly leave 85% of that energy in the ground, that's what's left. Look at Russia, look at the Middle East, you can't see it, Africa, look at North America. Are we really going to do that? Let's dim the lights on the world by 86%. Here we go. It's really an awful thought to me. Okay? I'd rather lift them from poverty. In fact, watch Africa just as a thought experiment. Watch the continent of Africa as I light it up. Think about that for a second. The big things, education, healthcare, rights and empowerment of women, they go for the water, they cook indoors, migration, immigration. Fertility and birth rates are directly tied to wealth. These big issues begin to be addressed. Now, there are challenges with that much energy use, but the biggest opportunity is to invest in the environment. When you become more wealthy, you can clean it up. That's the little dance, the 3E waltz. And that changes the world. You know, it actually changes the world, which I think is what you all want to do. You know, I'm 60. I got kids from 30 to 19. They want to change the world. That's what you want to do. That changes the world. If your bosses won't get along, take somebody on the other outside the aisle out to lunch every single day and just start having conversations. It'll be remarkable what happens when you start to talk. It's not about fuels. It's about improving the human condition and minimizing the impacts of all forms of energy. That's the transition. That's what we do at Switch Energy. It's my night job. Check it out. Trying to inspire an energy-educated future. Go to switchon.org. And again, I put money in this, but we're having quite an impact. We're in high schools and colleges, which is hard to get extensively. Check out the database and what we're up to. Thanks for your attention today.
Well, that last message is a great one for us to take away. So thank you for everybody being here. Thank you for taking the time. Thanks for taking this and doing something with it. Because, you know, when Scott first started talking about energy, it was just mind-blowing and educational. But I think, you know, it's clear his focal point in his more recent talks is, I think, to be much more of a motivating factor for everyone in the room to go out and engage in a bipartisan fashion. So please do so. Thanks, everybody. Safe travels.